Howie, good to be with you.
You ripped the coverage of the Republicans as being unfair and biased from the day you got into the race. But now as a leading candidate, don't you need to be able to withstand tough media scrutiny?
Oh, sure. That goes with the territory. But any Republican who's running should not be confused and think that the mainstream media are our friends. They are partisans. They wake up every day fighting for liberal political agendas. The New York Times wants Hillary Clinton to be the next president. And every day from now to Election Day, they're going to push stories advancing that. Now, that's the reality. That's the world we live in. The answer is not to whine and complain about it. The answer is to do what Reagan did. Go over the head of the media. Go straight to the American people. That's what we're working to do. That's why we're building and running a grassroots campaign to go around the media gatekeepers.
Since you brought up the New York Times, you accused the newspaper of a hit piece for reporting that you hadn't properly disclosed a loan of about $500,000 from Goldman Sachs, up to $500,000 for your 2012 Senate campaign, but you didn't deny any of the specifics in the article.
Oh, look, they breathlessly reported this horrible scandal. That when I was running for office, I was running against someone worth about $200 million. Mm-hmm. All of the establishment, all of the money, all of the lobbyists were against us. He had put $25 million of his own money into the race, and my wife and I, we took our life savings, and we did a combination of spending our savings and selling some stocks and assets, and then taking out loans against the remainder of the assets. And we put all of that into a loan that we gave to the campaign. Now, the entire basis of the New York Times story is that the loans we took, we disclosed on one form,
right,
but we didn't disclose it on the other. By the way, both of those forms are public. Both of them were public before the election.
Right, and there was a second loan from Citibank. But
both of those were disclosed
But
initially.
That explanation was included in the piece. So why a hit piece? You think it was overblown?
Because the story is a total nothing burger.
I'm going to leave aside the fact that I'm from New York. You know what I'm saying? Because there's been a lot of talk about New York values. I know you say that Donald Trump sort of started it, and you're using that against him. And you describe New York values as socially liberal, or pro-abortion, or pro-gay marriage, focus around money and the media. Trump, of course, brought up 9/11 in the debate. But are you using New York City as a sort of a caricature to appeal to Iowa conservatives?
Well, listen, the characterization didn't come from me. It came from Donald Trump.
Well, you've certainly seized on it, Senator.
But it was how he explained his values. So when he was doing an interview with Tim Russert back in 1999, and he was telling Tim was asking, all right, what are your views? And he says, I'm very pro-choice. I support partial birth abortion. And his explanation, this is Donald talking, he says, I'm from New York. I'm from Manhattan. That's what we believe in New York.
Right.
He says he's open to gay marriage. He's very pro-choice, supports partial birth. And the entire explanation he gives is those are New York values, and he's the one that draws those distinctions. They're not Iowa values, but that's what we believe in New York. So it's kind of curious to see Donald all upset that I'm repeating his own words that he used, explaining why he believes what he believes.
I would just point out that the media have repeatedly reported on Donald Trump's more liberal views in the 90s as supported Democratic politicians. Doesn't seem to have hurt him, but let me move on to the so-called birther story, because I was surprised at the way that took off. I thought it was going to be a two-day flap. Questions about you being born in Canada, does that affect your eligibility for the presidency? You were asked about it every day for a week by reporters everywhere you went. What did you make of that?
Oh, look, that's just the nature of reporters. They like to, as I mentioned, they're Democrats at the end of the day. The reporters want Hillary to win.
Reporters like conflict. And Donald Trump drove the agenda, or do you believe he drove the agenda by throwing that into the center of the campaign?
He drives the reporters' agenda. Mm-hmm. So we were in the midst of a bus tour through Iowa, went to 28 counties in 6 days, had enormous enthusiasm. But it was actually for what you do, looking at the media, it was a great field test. We would do, at pretty much every event, we'd do a press gaggle where we'd let the reporters ask questions. By the way, a lot of the other candidates don't do press gaggles. They don't take questions from the reporters. I take them all the time. Half to two-thirds of the questions from the reporters would be about Donald Trump and the latest attack, the latest tweet. But when you'd go in at the town hall, and by the way, these are rural town halls. We had one county, 7,000 people in the county. We had 700 people come to our event. 10% of the county came out. We had that had 600 people in it, 150 came to our event.
Well, you don't like being asked constantly about Donald Trump, but now you were mixing it up with Donald Trump. And do you think he's getting too personal?
Here's my point, Howie. When we do town halls and actual voters would ask questions, nobody would ask about the silly birther attack. Nobody would ask about Donald Trump. They ask about the real problems facing this country. How are we going to defeat ISIS? How do we stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons? How are we going to protect our Second Amendment, our religious liberty? How are we going to have more jobs? And it was a perfect focus group where the reporters all follow Trump like catnip. If he wakes up at 6 in the morning and sends some wild tweet, every reporter asks, did you see the latest tweet? You know what? The American people are a lot more serious and substantive than the reporters. They're interested in who's ready to be next commander-in-chief.
I have one more New York Times question. A piece last month said that you are not very likable, Senator, that you seem to be taking an almost academic approach to achieving likability, and you can appeal obsessively calibrated right down to dramatic pauses. Dramatic pause now. What did you make of that? What do you make of that line of media analysis of your candidacy?
Look, it's a perfect example of the kind of hit piece the New York Times does. By the way, if I were a Democrat, go look at the stories the New York Times wrote about Barack Obama, the inspirational campaign driven from the people. You can write the exact same story about, have you seen anywhere in the mainstream media that 10% of a rural county came to our event? That 25% of a small town came to our event? They don't write that.
It's certainly true that you're not the most popular guy in the Senate.
But let's be clear why that is. It's not how I treat people. I mean, in my entire time in public life, I've treated everyone with civility and respect. What is problematic in the Senate, from other senators' perspective, is speaking the truth, actually saying what's going on. You know, we just passed a $1 trillion omnibus bill that funded the entirety of Barack Obama's agenda. Funded Obama, funded executive amnesty, funded the Iran deal, funded Obama's indefensible plan to bring Syrian refugees to America. The unpardonable sin that I committed is that I actually speak the truth and say, why is Republican leadership funding the Democrats' objectives? By the way, Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi said the same thing.
Quick last question. When you bash the media, and you've been treated unfairly at times, portrayed as somebody who scares little children, but isn't that in your interest to do that? Your base loves that. They don't like the mainstream media.
Well, there's a reason they don't like the mainstream media. Because they're partisan liberal Democrats.
Every single journalist?
Almost without exception.
Almost without exception.
Almost without exception. That they have a partisan agenda. And you know, we understand. All right, let's take a substantive issue. Police officers. If you have one police officer somewhere who does something he shouldn't have, the press will breathlessly report on this terrible, horrible police officer, and all the Democratic politicians will jump in and demonize and vilify the cops. Let me ask you something. How come the press doesn't tell stories of heroism? But the great news is we don't live anymore in a world of 3 networks that have a stranglehold on information. We've got the Internet. We've got the Drudge Report. We've got talk radio. We've got social media. We've got the ability to go directly around and directly to the people.
Senator Cruz, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.